Hello again, everyone. Welcome to your final lesson here for INRW 0090. In this one, we're talking about audience and purpose, okay? And this is specifically when it comes to writing a paper, or if you're giving a speech, perhaps, to somebody later on down the line. Sometimes you'll be asked to consider who your audience is going to be, okay? Who are you addressing with what you're writing or what you're speaking about? So that's what we're going to talk about here. First step in all this is to know who you as the writer are supposed to be. Okay? And this may seem like common sense, right? But you're not always asked to be yourself here. Okay? Sometimes you're asked to be someone else. Okay? So the first question that has to be asked here is, what point of view are you using to write with? Okay? And when we talk about point of view, this is something that ultimately will evolve over time depending on what classes you take. Okay? Sometimes you'll be asked to write in one particular point of view or another. Okay? So I'll tell you about some of the examples here. The most common one that people are familiar with is called the first person point of view. Okay? And that's where you use I, me, us, right? Any words that include yourself, right? You're using the first person perspective here, okay? And this comes across kind of like a journal entry, okay? It's usually very casual in terms of the voice and the tone of it. It's very candid, okay? And it's usually written from your own personal perspective, okay? It's like an eyewitness account, okay? Like a diary, a journal, something along those lines, right? You can use your own voice and be as casual as you like about it. Second person is when you as the speaker are directly addressing someone else, okay? And you use the words you or you all. Right now, I'm using the second person tone of voice when I'm speaking because I'm directly addressing you as the students. Okay? And this can be something that's either very formal or very casual. Okay, the example we have right now, what I'm doing is pretty casual. Okay, and it depends on the subject. I mean, if you are directly addressing a class like I am, right, you can be pretty casual about it. Okay, if you're addressing, friends or relatives, right, acquaintances, right, you can usually be pretty casual. Okay, if you're addressing a more specific group, if you're trying to impress somebody, if you're in a job interview, or if you're running for office of some kind, if you're trying to address people that you're trying to get to listen to you, then sometimes you have to tweak that a little bit. Okay, you may have to ramp it up and be a little bit more professional. Okay, be a little bit more accessible, or you may be able to relax it a little bit. Okay, be a little bit more casual about it. It all depends on the assignment. And the final stage of all this, the one that you're usually going to be asked to write in future classes, is called third person. Okay? And third person perspective is where you completely remove yourself from the equation. Okay? And you also don't directly address someone else. Okay? You discuss a topic in the third person. Okay? You can still use he, she, or it pronouns, okay, or they or them, but ultimately you're not saying you or I. Okay? You're not giving an opinion necessarily here. Okay? And third person perspective is usually a little bit more formal, a little bit more reportive. Okay? Most news stories that you read by major news outlets and so forth are typically written in third person. Okay? And it's usually addressed to a much wider audience. Okay? It's a little bit more accessible to everybody. So let's see if you can identify first, second, or third person with some of the examples here. First one says, I think I lost my wallet. I can't find it anywhere. Oh, I could just kick myself. Because of the use of the word I all throughout that, it's easily first person, okay? I'm talking to you as another person, but I'm using I. I. And I'm only using I here, okay? Second one says, Tiffany used her prize money from the science fair to buy herself a new microscope, okay? Well, if Tiffany is not I and it's not you, then Tiffany is a third person, okay, like what we talked about when we talked about subject-verb agreement, okay? So if Tiffany is a third person, okay, then it's third-person perspective, okay? Mike always hated school. Same thing as with Tiffany, okay? Mike is a third person. It's not me and it's not you, okay? You can wait in here and make yourself at home, okay? Here we have the use of the word you, okay? And you already we know is second person, okay? There's no use of the word I anywhere in there, so we can't really confuse the two. Okay, so if you see just the word you used, then you is second person. This one's a little bit trickier. We could do ourselves a favor and make a reservation for our group. This one is actually first person as well, okay, because we're using we and our and ourselves. Okay, all those words are first person collective. Okay, even though it has to do with a group, you're including yourself as part of that group. Okay, and so technically I is buried in there somewhere, so it's still first person. Finally, you should be proud of yourselves for finishing this enormous project. Okay, again, you and yourselves, immediately second person. Now, knowing a little bit more about yourself, okay? Next thing we can think about is what role is the writer or the speaker going to take? Okay, so sometimes in an assignment, what this means is you're asked to take on a specific role as the writer or as the speaker. Okay, you have to imagine yourself as someone else. Okay, and this all has to do with the tone that you write in. Okay, and what I mean by tone is usually whatever emotion is behind this. Okay, and sometimes there's a lot of emotion, and sometimes there's no emotion at all. Okay, so it all depends on what level you're being asked to write in. So the tone can be a positive tone, for example. Okay, if you're taking a positive tone, then you're basically saying something nice about someone or something else. Okay, and it's pretty easy to recognize a positive tone. Okay, this could be anything from a love letter, an ode, right? An ode is like a poem written in admiration of someone or something. It could be a birthday or a greeting card, a eulogy at a funeral, right? Not a happy event, really, but if you're saying something nice about somebody, it is. Or even just a positive review, like if you're looking on Yelp or something like that, and you're looking for someone to say something nice about a restaurant or even a movie that you want to see. Okay? Neutral tone is also pretty easy to recognize because there's usually no emotion behind it. Okay, it's an unbiased report of some kind, and it can seem a little bit boring. Okay, it may just be the results from an experiment or from a research paper, and most of the time you'll be asked to take a pretty neutral tone with most of the papers that you write. But another one that's more easily recognizable is a negative tone. Okay, and negative tones are, unfortunately, in a lot of cases, what people find to be the most entertaining. Okay, and so this is why people watch, elimination shows, reality TV, right, stuff like that, because usually there are negative emotions behind it that make things a little bit more exciting. There's more drama behind it. Okay, and a negative tone can be used to pretty devastating extents, unfortunately. You can see this used in something called a polemic. Okay, a polemic is when you have a harsh criticism of something or someone. Okay, and you can see some people write polemics about politics, about religion, about just about any subject you can imagine. Okay, a negative review of some kind, and political rants are used often. Okay, anytime that you see a political ad on TV when elections come around, sometimes it'll be a negative ad attacking the other candidate, okay? And sometimes it'll be a positive one trying to build up the current candidate, okay? So you see this used time and time again. And negative tones can even be used to, again, very damaging situations, right? We can see hate speech, right, where we have individuals attacking another person's religion, another person's ethnicity, okay? This can be a really horrible thing here. And even some religious sermons themselves can become very negative, right? When you have a preacher calling down fire and brimstone or something like that, talking about hating other people, right? Again, it becomes very negative. Okay, so whatever tone that you're recognizing in the way a person speaks or the way they write, okay, sometimes that can tell you kind of what stance that person is trying to take. And now that you're familiar with yourself as the writer or the speaker, now you can start to look at who your audience is going to be. Okay, and the audience can determine a lot of things. Okay, it can determine what you're going to write. Okay, if you're going to try to write something for a specific audience, if you're trying to reach people, bring them together, if you're trying to separate them, okay, depends on what you're trying to say. Is your audience going to be able to understand you, and how are they going to react? Okay, what is your mission here? Sometimes it matters what kind of examples and details you include so that they can understand it. Okay? Are they going to be able to connect with the references that you make? Are they going to be able to identify with it? Is it more culturally specific? So again, are you trying to unite people? Are you trying to separate them? Are you trying to confuse them? Okay. An example of this is if you, let's say you're given the task of speaking to a kindergarten class. Okay. If you are asked to talk to them about rocket science, it may be a little bit more difficult. Okay. If you're asked to talk about SpongeBob, though, it might be a little easier because they know SpongeBob, right? So just a little example for context here. And sometimes your audience tells you what it is you need to emphasize, right? What specific examples do you want to include, and how can they understand your topic better, okay? Are you supposed to be able to give them specific examples to something that they know about? Okay, again, talking to a kindergarten class about cartoons is easier than science. And sometimes it matters what your word choice is. Again, what is it you're trying to do with your topic? Okay, are you trying to inform people? Are you trying to stir up controversy, offend people? Are you trying to avoid offending people? Okay, so word choice is very, very important in all this. Okay, and again, as you get further along down the line, you'll have instructors who will give you more specific instructions about what to do and what not to do. Okay, but this is just kind of a preview of things to come. And again, going back to the tone, are you trying to be positive, negative, neutral? Are you trying to be hostile to your audience? Are you trying to stir up a riot? Are you trying to be respectful and bring people together? Again, it all depends on your tone. And all of this put together falls under what we call rhetoric. Okay, and there are entire courses you can take on rhetoric. Okay, going back to what the ancient Greeks used to do. You know, they used to pride themselves on being able to start a riot just with words, okay, and not just with actions. Okay, so for good or for bad, rhetoric can be used in all kinds of different ways, okay, and we see it all the time in today's society. Ultimately, though, knowing who your audience is and who yourself as the speaker or the writer is, all this gives focus to your writing and helps keep you on task. Okay, going back and looking at these types of questions, just like we saw with the paragraph lesson, right, gives you a sense of direction with what you're doing. So even just asking basic questions: who, what, when, where, why, and how of your writing. So now that you know who you're writing to and who you as the writer are, what are you going to write about? Okay. Pick a topic that your audience is going to be able to understand, okay? And for this particular class and most classes, your audience is going to be your instructor, okay? And your instructor usually knows a thing or two about a thing or two, okay? They're usually pretty knowledgeable about things. If it's something really technical, maybe try to give specific examples that make a little more sense. When and where your audience is located is also something very particular, okay? Knowing that your audience is going to be able to identify with your examples is important. Where your audience is located, right? This is where we can talk about specific word choice and so forth. Okay, if you're using specific slang and stuff like that that makes sense in the United States, might not make sense everywhere else in the world, and vice versa. Okay, this is why some people in America don't like British comedy. Okay, the phrasing, the wording, and so forth, it doesn't always connect. Okay, and even in different parts of the country, you know, phrases like y'all and stuff, if we say that in the South, right, it doesn't make sense to people in the North, right? It sounds silly. Okay? And when is your audience located? I incorporate this because when students have to study literature, for example, this is what makes it so difficult. Okay, this is why they don't like it so much. Okay? If you have to study a book written several hundred years ago, okay, and you see specific examples like Dante's Inferno, for example, it kind of gets lost on people. It becomes boring, okay, because a lot of the jokes and the references that the author makes made sense for the audience of his time. Okay, the example from Dante's Inferno that I usually tell my students is you have a situation where a guy is being given a tour of hell, right, and all the torments of people who've been sent there. And the author includes people from his everyday life, okay, famous people from his time period that people would have known, okay, when he was writing it. Okay, so an audience from his time period would have gotten the fact that he is basically condemning people that he doesn't like, okay, a famous pope, a king, a literary figure, his landlord, right, people that he would have known from everyday life, okay. So for us, several hundred years later reading it, it's not as funny and it doesn't make as much sense. Okay, so perhaps the author wasn't expecting people several hundred years later to get it. Okay, it would be like one of us making a joke about the Kardashians today. Several hundred years later, people might not know who the Kardashians are. Okay, but don't tell them that. And of course, why are you writing about it? Why are you writing about this specific topic? Why is it important to you? Are you trying to inform people, persuade them, compare and contrast two ideas? It all depends on what you're being given, okay, in terms of the prompt. And finally, how are you going to go about writing it? Okay, based on what your answer is to your why question, how are you going to structure it? Okay, there's different ways to structure an informative paper versus a persuasive paper. Okay, and in future classes, you'll be given specific examples of that. Okay, the composition classes are chock full of these examples. Now, something we can talk about briefly here when we talked about word choice is something called word connotation. Okay, and word connotation has to do with words that mean the same thing, basically, but they send a different message of some kind. Okay? So, for example, if I use a negative example of negative word connotation, okay, and I say that someone has a very childish way of viewing the world, the word childish carries with it this particular image here that you see at the bottom, right? A child throwing a temper tantrum, okay? Someone who is immature, they're mad because they don't get what they want. All of those are qualities of someone who is childish. But I can put a positive spin on this. If I change the word childish to the word childlike, then it becomes positive. And you get the other image here, okay? A childlike person is someone who is carefree, imaginative, they're playful, they're excited, they're happy, right? That is the kind of quality that you want to see in someone, is someone who is childlike. Okay? So again, I haven't changed any other word in the sentence, just that one word. And yes, they both mean the same thing in terms of having the quality of a child, but here we're talking about something positive versus something negative. So if you want to compliment somebody, you call them childlike, but if you want to insult them, call them childish. Another example is to say that someone is a very cheap person. Okay? If I say Bob is a cheap man, that means that he hoards money and keeps it to himself, but for all the wrong reasons, right? He's stingy, he doesn't like to share, but I can also put a positive spin on it, and I can say that he's a frugal man, okay? Same thing, I haven't changed any other words here except this one description word, okay? And calling someone frugal means that they're saving money, but for all the right reasons, okay? It means that they're doing it to be wise with their spending choices, okay? Maybe they've got a vacation that they're planning, maybe they're trying to buy a house or do something like that, but you want to compliment somebody, call them frugal. If you want to insult somebody, call them cheap. So here's some other examples of word connotation. Okay? If I refer to somebody as meticulous versus someone as picky, okay? Meticulous is a compliment, right? It means that they're very attentive to detail. If you want something done by a meticulous artist, then you're going to get a really beautiful product. They're going to pay a lot of attention to detail. If you get somebody who is picky, though, okay, picky is negative. It means that they're difficult to please, okay? Maybe they're not able to make a good choice all the time. You have to force them to make a choice. If you call someone peculiar, or say that you have a peculiar relationship, okay, versus a unique one, okay, same thing here. Peculiar can be negative. It means weird or strange, okay, has kind of a negative association with it. But unique can mean positive, right? It can mean one of a kind, something that's rare, valuable. And the difference between steadfast and stubborn, okay? If you call someone steadfast, that's a positive quality. It means that they're strong, they're unwavering. But if you want to insult them, call them stubborn, because it means that they're unreasonable, they're not cooperative, they're unmoving for all the wrong reasons. Okay? So word connotation, going along with audience and purpose, can mean all the difference, okay? And it's something very subtle, right? You have to play with it a little bit. You have to learn a little bit more about it. But again, this is how you learn how to use rhetoric, okay? So head on over now to the quiz section and take a look at it.